Hello everyone, EU5 is a game that has a lot of things going on. For example, if your soldiers have a higher literacy rate, they convert themselves into manpower faster because of course they do, and in no way is this communicated to the player. That's fine, but what is a touch more annoying I believe is that the game contains a decent chunk of noob traps, or things you can do that look good on the surface and seem like a good idea, but nevertheless are things that you should avoid doing. And today I want to cover 5 pretty specific noob traps for you to avoid in your games of EU5, hopefully saving you some learning time in the process, as well as a 6th, more general thing that will round out the whole thing pretty well, I believe. So that said, well, a like would be appreciated if you haven't already, and a subscription would be amazing, and if you're interested in picking up EU5, pre-order or normal order or anything on the Paradox store actually, well, please use code Lemon Cake, it does help support the channel. But enough self-chilling. For number 1, we have the diplomatic spending slider. That's this slider over here, inside of your economy tab, your second tab after government. So what does this diplomacy slider do? Well, first of all, let's get the basic out of the way. It is a slider, and it's a scaling slider based on the size of your country. So if you're a small country, this costs you less money, but more importantly, if you're a big country, it costs you more money. I mean, it's never really free to run the slider on max here. So running the slider on max here, if you are even like the richest country in the world, is still going to be expensive, and hence a good way of potentially saving money. And what does it do at max level? Well, at 100%, you get plus 30 loyalty of subjects. You get some diplomatic capacity, 100% more diplomatic capacity. Your maximum diplomats you're allowed as a nation is increased by 3, and you gain 0.4 monthly diplomats. These are all good, but here's my question to you. A lot of countries you're going to be playing are going to start with subjects, that's fair. I've gone into England here as an example. That plus 30 loyalty of subjects, like if you needed to keep a subject loyal, sure, you should probably run the diplomatic slider, especially because this loyal subjects can stop paying you taxes from diplomacy, so it can almost pay for itself. But at the same time, if they're loyal without the slider, that's fine. No one's gone disloyal. If I look at my diplomacy interface and I look at my subjects, as you can see, they're all still loyal, even with the slider set on 0. Of course, Aquitaine's only at 52 loyalty, but above 50 is still loyal, so it's fine. Most countries in the world, I find, tend to actually be able to, within some improving relations and even some small gifts sometimes, actually able to keep their subjects loyal without needing the diplomacy slider on max. Next, we have the diplomatic capacity. If, again, you have a lot of subjects and you have some big alliances, you might be actually using this diplomatic capacity. But again, here as England, we are guaranteeing the Balliol Rebellion here in Scotland, right? And we have a bunch of subjects in Wales and Ireland, we have Aquitaine, we have all these subjects. And even then, when we decrease diplomatic spending by a significant amount, like we can afford all of the subjects we're having. Of course, if you start making big alliances and so on, you're going to have to keep paying for it. But again, if you're not doing that, this does nothing for you. And finally, what does diplomatic capacity do? It gives you some monthly diplomats and more max diplomat cap. If you need a diplomat, sure, that can be useful. If you don't need the diplomat, what I actually find myself doing frequently is running the diplomatic spending on 0. Then if I very desperately need a diplomat to peace out or something, I'll start diplomatic spending up. And now as I'm getting, dare I say, a little bit better at the game, I'm finding myself preempting that, realizing, okay, I'm going to need a diplomat in 2 to 3 months. All right, I'll spend money on the diplomats. I'll get my 0.5 diplomats in 2 months ticks. I'll get myself a diplomat. But otherwise, am I doing a diplomatic action more than once every 10 months? Like, am I sending out that many alliance officers? Am I sending out that many royal marriage officers? Am I interacting that much with my subjects? Not really. And this is a significant amount of money. If you look at here, England is making 48 ducats. We'll be spending 15. So if you think about it, we're basically saving 30% of our total income by just not spending money on the diplomatic slider. And there's no, like, negatives you think are hidden here. It doesn't decrease your or increase your AE decay. Like, there's no inherent drawbacks from not running the diplomatic slider if you're not using the features from it. So it's just something to bear in mind, because I feel like most people, if they're going to be playing the game, really don't need to be running the diplomatic slider even on half, like forget running it on full. So feel free and be fine just knocking it straight down to 0. For number 2, we're going to have not knowing and building the capital or trade center or other unique buildings. And I've come over to Hungary here because it's a relatively rich country, but it does actually have a lot of its capital buildings missing at day 1. What do I mean by that? Well, first things first, when we look at the nobility, we have buildings like the Royal Garden and the Royal Court, which are capital-specific buildings, so these buildings can only be built in the capital, and they provide you with national-level buffs like efficiency of cabinet and crown power. As for the Royal Garden, well, it has some extra monthly diplomats, which we talked about earlier, and some monthly prestige. And this is just a thing, a building you build, and you just have this bonus. And yeah, look, it's not just the noble buildings. For example, the burghers have this building called the Chancery. It's this one over here. Now, the Chancery is quite interesting because I feel like you are meant to almost find this building, because as a tech in the Renaissance, they said, oh, you can build an extra level of Chancery in your capital, which is how I found out the building. But you should absolutely build the first level of Chancery, because not only does it give you extra literacy or max literacy for nobility and burghers in your capital, it also gives you 2.5 efficiency of cabinet, which means once you build the second building level, it's an extra 5% efficiency of cabinet and extra literacy for nobility and burghers. It's just a nice bonus to have, and absolutely worth the building maintenance and, well, building the thing. So, yeah. And that's, again, not just unique buildings to capital. Market warehouses are great things to build inside the market center buildings. So if you are a market center, for example, if you're Pest, market warehouses are a good thing to build. However, again, the game doesn't really communicate this to you in any way, and if you don't know that the market warehouse or entry ports later exist, you're not going to build them. And look, this list of buildings can look pretty scary, but I do recommend just going through it and taking a look at options you can have. And again, also bear in mind is that as you unlock new buildings and do new research, this list is going to keep expanding, but yeah, look, there's some pretty nice stuff hidden over here. And the other big one I think is really important to mention is actually under soldiers, and that is going to be the sergeantry. The sergeantry is quite interesting because until you get armories in the, dare I say, mid-Renaissance or early mid-Renaissance if you're rushing it, this is the only way you're going to be able to interact with the regular armies, because this is the only source of monthly manpower that you actually have until armories in the early Renaissance. And this is the monthly manpower used for your standing armies. Meaning, unless you're playing something like the Byzantines that have access to an alternative monthly manpower buildings, or the Mamluks that have another monthly manpower buildings, or something like that, that's basically the only way you have of interacting with the regular army mechanic, by building the sergeantry. And that's just not communicated. It's also a good building to have, gives you local crown power on the location, namely your capital, which is a good place to have local crown power on, allows you to recruit regiments there, obviously. And I mean, yeah, again, this is something you should build. And yes, countries like, for example, Serbia do start with a sergeantry and Hungary doesn't, which is kind of funny to me. But you should absolutely just build it. It's not even that expensive to build in your capital. And look, yes, it does take 238 days, for example, but you now interact with the regular troops mechanic. So yeah, build the sergeantry and build a bunch of the unique buildings. They're quite hidden, but don't ignore them. Next, and again, this is going to be quite specific, we have to talk about our societal values. This is something you're going to be dealing with relatively a decent amount of time. And let's, for example, consider something like this serfdom versus free subjects we have. Hungary is going to start the game with 60 towards serfdom. And let's say you look at this and you go, okay, I want to focus on more serfdom. I want to get extra serfdom. I'm going to go to my cabinet. I'm going to appoint a cabinet member, let's say this guy, and I'm going to tell him to please change my societal values towards serfdom. And he's going to go do that. That seems fine, right? The problem is that cabinet member is going to do absolutely nothing now. The way that these tickers work, and this isn't communicated that well to the player, is that if you have progress in one direction, for example, cabinet influences and then court language and then hunting permits and then my ruler being benevolent, we have this total calculation for the total monthly push towards serfdom, and we should have 0.17. So you'd think we'll be pushing 60, and then we get to 60.17, and so on and so forth. But no, passive push cannot push further than basically 100 times its amount. So in practice, we can't push past 17.96 towards serfdom if we only have 0.167 towards serfdom. Now, if we had something like, let's give a different example, like for example, in this conservatory practice, we have 20 towards conservatory and we're pushing 0.3, and we then go ahead and assign our guy to change societal values towards conservatory, yes, not only will this let us push beyond 0.3, we'll actually be able to push to 0.4796 conservatory, but it would actually do something. The game, however, is quite happy to let you push serfdom and waste the cabinet slot, which are not that, they're not that free to get. The game is quite happy to just let you infinitely push serfdom with no actual benefits. So yes, if you are using the change societal value action, bear in mind that that's how change societal values works, and at some point it's going to do literally nothing. My next point, and this is going to affect more urbanized societies, and what I mean by that is basically Italy and the Netherlands. Don't neglect food. The way that urban provinces work is that if you are a city, you reduce your food production by 33%. This is pretty bad, especially on something like a food RGO, such as livestock, which, would be a good way to feed your people. Towns aren't much of an improvement, reducing it by 20% as well, but are not as bad. What will happen is, eventually, these locations will start to urbanize, and food production will decrease, which is fine. If we take a look here at Hungary, we're actually selling a little bit of food, but let me tell you, we're probably making a lot more food than you'd think we are at the moment. And we can actually work out how much food we're making. We're selling 2.72, and in the pest market, the value of food is currently at a 0.04. That does not seem like a lot. In fact, most of the time, food prices collapse down to the bottom, and you want food prices to collapse down to the bottom because cheap food encourages population growth, and population is good. However, The problem is that in times of famine, food prices are going to shoot up. And when you're used to buying food for 0.01 and suddenly you have to buy food at 0.2, a 20-fold increase, that starts to become quite noticeable on the economy side of things. The worst part is, it's also quite an insidious, slow killer. If you take a look at, for example, the Genoa market, it does actually start with a pretty decent positive day one food balance, but as it starts to urbanize, it's going to lose that food balance. However, Genoa is also quite a developed place with loads of cities, which means there's loads of cities with granaries, including new granaries that you build, and those granaries are going to start filling up with food. And even right now, Genoa has 29,000 food in stockpile. So what's going to happen is you're going to start eating the food from your stockpile and dropping the food amount inside your stockpiles. That's how eating food from stockpiles works. This is good if you raise your peasants, which decreases your food production, and you go on a campaign and you come home and your peasants work the farms and your food recovers. That's all fine. But what can happen is if you are losing food every year draining your stockpiles, you don't really realize there's something bad going on until it becomes literally game ruining. Because what becomes even worse for nations like Genoa or in the Low Countries is you're probably making quite a bit of money from trade. Let's say even here in Hungary, we're making 10 ducats from trade. We're selling dyes, at least planning to sell dyes in Prague. We're selling marble in Krakow. We're selling iron in Tunis. We're selling saffron in Venice. We're selling all these nice luxury trade goods. We're selling all these expensive things and we're making some decent money. However, that's using our trade capacity. The moment we have a famine, we're going to, instead of making money selling useful trade goods and making, money as mentioned before, we're going to be using that trade capacity to import food. So you kind of have this double hit to your income, because not only are you now wasting your trade capacity in practice on importing food instead of making money, you're now importing really expensive food into your country. All of that is to say, don't neglect food. Finally, and this is going to be super specific, but I promise this is genuinely a noob trap. In the Age of Renaissance, after you research the Renaissance and you research Renaissance thought and you get permanent cabinet and you get sovereignty, you're going to have access to this tech over here, the rights of the nobles. And when you research this, you'll be able to set certain rights and nobility. And indeed, you actually have some options. You can go ahead and strengthen the rights of the nobles, blocks your crown from cabinet, increases noble power, but gives you more noble levies and noble estate equilibrium. Or you can give a rural noble authority, decrease in fortification maintenance, increase in progress to serfdom, increase in noble power, but making the nobles quite happy as well. However, you can also be tempted to curtail the nobility. And on the surface, it looks pretty good. A max tax on nobles estate is good. That means you can tax them more. And usually the nobles are one of those estates that tend to be quite happy, but quite resistant to taxation. So on the surface, you're going to see this and go, oh, this looks good. Decrease in nobility power is also usually a good thing. And nobility estate equilibrium, again, is annoying, but you can come over it. In fact, to even sweeten the deal, it has monthly progress to centralization, which usually you'd look at and go, that would be nice. However, this also blocks the nobility from serving in your cabinet. This is bad, because basically, even in republics, 80 to 90% of the people inside of your cabinet that can be fitting cabinet roles are going to be nobles. So in practice, what this means is that instead of being able to have loads of really good candidates for all of your cabinet positions that are coming in from the nobility, you're just not going to have them. And this is going to really, really hurt your cabinet efficiency, like quite a significant amount. In practice, basically, curtailing the nobility is a massive noob trap because you just don't get good members of cabinet once you've done that. And again, even in places like republics, you'd think there wouldn't be nobility, but no, the cabinet is basically entirely dominated by members of the nobility, and curtailing the nobility just means you don't really have anyone in cabinet anymore. So yeah, don't do this, unless you really know what you're doing, in which case you're probably not watching this video. But okay, we've done a lot of talking now. What about number 6, the final, more generic point? And I think this is more so a way to approach playing EU5 as a game. And for that, we need to talk about the automations. And my point in general is going to be, even when you're learning the game, don't over-automate it. When I play, what do I play with? I automate trade, I keep production methods automated, and I will automate replacing generals and replacing admirals. This is a bit of a misnomer. It doesn't actually replace your current standing army's generals. So, for example, I've raised an army and I assign a specific general because I want them to be serving there. It doesn't, override that. What it instead does is that if I raise some levies or raise some troops or split up some troops, they're going to automatically assign a general from my pool, and the best general that the game decides is the best general, if that makes sense, to any single stag that doesn't have a general. And that's fine because in practice this means that when you're playing the game, you're never in a situation where you're accidentally without a general, really, unless you just, again, run out of cabinet members because you've curtailed an ability from it. Actually, participating in cabinet is not related to leading troops. That's fine. That's a separate thing, but don't worry about it. Nevertheless, those are the things I automate, and it's fine. What you can automate is basically playing the game for you. You can automate the game basically checking out your monthly balance for you, so making money. This automates taxation and all the sliders. You can automate building new buildings and even set it how much money you should save for building new buildings versus how much money you should spend. You can also automate it basically managing your economy. There are cases where you have an unprofitable building. For example, the glass building in Pest is not profitable at the moment because there's not that much glass demand, but I'm going to keep this building around for a minute because I know glass demand will pick up once we start building more cathedrals and urbanizing, because building cities costs, for example, glass. But you can, if you really want to, temporarily close these buildings so people don't work in them and, waste money. But we can automate that. We can automate subsidizing buildings. We can automate the destruction of buildings. We can automate the destruction of estate buildings. We can automate the expansion of RGOs. That's these things. So build more, build that for me. We can automate all research for me. Automate setting laws for me. Automate government policies. There we go. We've immediately reformed our monarchy into a feudal nobility. We can automate cabinet. There we go. We're strengthening government and stabilizing the country now. We can automate our parliament. We can automate our estates. We can automate cultural acceptance. We can automate our diplomacy. So all the diplomacy we do with the AI is now, automated. We can automate setting rivals. There we go. We've rivaled Serbia. We can automate exploration, colonization, army construction, and navy construction. So the game will build troops for us. And once we've done all this, in fact, I haven't even clicked on religious doctrines. So if you're playing something like the Orthodox Church and you actually have some control over your religious doctrines, you can automate that being picked for you. Once you've done all this, what is there left to do? Well, I've tested it, and the answer is you sit there and you click on events, and that's it. And I wouldn't even say the game does particularly well. What I found rather funny when I was checking this on England is that if you look at London and you look at demographics, there are 395 French people that start in London, and the first thing my cabinet did was dispatch a person to culture convert those low Franconians or assimilate them into English. That is not a top priority as England, to get rid of these 395 French people in London, but that's what the game did. So I won't even say it makes great decisions for you, but to be honest, having played it again, I'll say the decisions are fine. Like, it doesn't make inherently bad ones. And at this point, I'm just going to say, what are you playing the game? Like, as an observer or challenge mode or something, sure. And if it's one of your first games and you really don't want to deal with something super specific, like you really don't want to deal with cabinet, you're going to be playing this game and you want to, look through the tech tree or whatever, sure, have fun. These buttons exist for you to use. But at the same time, the less of these buttons you use, I think, the better. Not even because they're so bad for the AI, but it's almost a case of, like, do you want to play the game or do you want to watch the gameplay itself, right? So that's just going to be my recommendation there. They're not even that bad, and I think that's the insidious part, is they're actually not as awful as I make them out to be with that culture converting the French example, right? Because what is my cabinet doing right now? It's strengthening governance, strengthening stability. Let me be honest, I would have done that as well. I would have not appointed this guy because I knew I would have been strengthening my stability, so I would have changed my cabinet members, which now cost stability to change, probably to this guy, for example, but I would have day one appointed a higher mill guy and strengthened government and strengthened stability. This is literally what I would have done. So it's not like doing anything even extra bad is the painful part to admit. But yes, I think my advice of don't over-automate the game still certainly stands. With that said, that is unfortunately all the time I have for you today. Thank you very much for watching, with a special thank you to all my channel members, especially Ark, Solar, Suleiman, Lord Zendikar, Nikas, Nanhatan, Star72, The Awesome Rabbit, Best for Gaming, Grabmore Flavia, Lebarule, W Haste, Sov, Anthony35, AC Napper, Conspiracy Pizza, Yukata, Danray, Malvi, Jack, Ryland, Stuart Allen, Andrew Black, Nebula, Zentronic, and Twoiner.